I used to think betrayal was something you saw coming. A missed call. A changed password. A glance held too long. I was wrong. Betrayal doesn't announce itself. It moves in. It settles into the routine. It waits until you're too broken to notice. The accident happened on a Thursday. Rain on asphalt. Hydroplane. Guardrail. Glass. Then silence. I woke up in a room that smelled like antiseptic and stale coffee. My legs didn't work. The doctor said spinal trauma. Said recovery would take time. Said I'd need patience. I believed him. I believed my wife when she said she'd handle everything. She held my hand. Cried at the right moments. Promised to be my strength. I trusted her. I trusted the neighbor who offered to help with groceries. Who fixed the ramp. Who checked the mail. Who brought meals. Who stayed late. I didn't notice the pattern at first. The way his hand lingered on my shoulder. The way she'd leave the room when he arrived. The way the door locked from the outside when I asked for water. I thought it was convenience. I thought it was care. I was wrong. The abuse didn't start with violence. It started with access. Access to my chair. Access to my medication. Access to my silence. He thought paralysis meant helplessness. He thought I wouldn't remember. He thought I couldn't fight back. But the mind doesn't paralyze. It archives. I archived everything. The dates. The times. The sounds. The weight. The words. I didn't scream. I didn't beg. I just watched. And I waited. Because waiting isn't surrender. It's strategy. And strategy wins. I started recording. Not with a phone. With a journal. With timestamps. With patterns. With the quiet certainty that one day I would stand. Not just physically. Legally. Morally. Financially. I would stand over them. Not with a weapon. With documentation. With truth. With the kind of evidence that doesn't fade. I didn't know how long it would take. I just knew it would happen. Because the body heals slower than the mind. And the mind never forgets what it's forced to survive. I was surviving. And survival is just preparation for the next phase. The phase where the ledger balances itself. The phase where the abuser becomes the accused. The phase where the betrayer becomes the defendant. I was building it. Brick by brick. Day by day. Quietly. Consistently. Unapologetically. The blueprint was clear. The foundation was set. I was ready for the next phase. Not with them. With me. I did not fight back physically. I could not. But I fought back mentally. Every touch. Every violation. Every whispered excuse from my wife. I logged it. I built a timeline. I memorized the sequence. The way he entered through the back door at 4:30. The way she would leave a glass of water on the nightstand and step out to run errands. The way the deadbolts clicked shut behind them. I did not close my eyes. I watched. I recorded the cadence of his breathing. The pressure of his hands. The exact words he used to justify it. Said I should be grateful. Said she was overwhelmed. Said I was broken anyway. I let the words settle. I let them harden into evidence. I learned quickly that trauma does not erase memory. It etches it. And etched memory is the foundation of justice. I started requesting physical therapy. Not for mobility. For observation. The therapists who came to the house noticed the tension in my shoulders. The flinching. The way I tracked the hallway. One of them, a clinical specialist named Dr. Aris, asked direct questions. I did not answer at first. I waited until the third session. Then I handed her a folded notebook. Not a diary. A ledger. Dates. Times. Descriptions. Physical markers. She read it. Her expression did not change. But her hands tightened slightly on the pages. She said 2 words. We will handle it. I nodded. I did not cry. I did not break. I just continued the protocol. She referred me to a specialized neurotrauma unit. Not for my spine. For my nervous system. They called it somatic reintegration. I called it weaponizing my survival. The treatment did not focus on forgiveness. It focused on regulation. On grounding. On reclaiming the neural pathways that had been hijacked by fear. I learned to separate sensation from panic. I learned to track my own breathing without dissociating. I learned that the body remembers, but it can also be retrained. I attended sessions twice a week, recorded the progress, mapped the recovery, not to walk again, to think clearly again. Clarity is the only antidote to violation. My wife's behavior shifted, not outwardly, subtly. She started asking more questions. About the therapy, about the doctors, about what I was learning. I gave her vague answers, said it was routine, said it was about pain management. She nodded, relaxed, thought I was still the man in the chair, the man who needed her, the man who couldn't leave. She did not understand that the chair was just furniture. The mind was already packing. I began securing my financials, not through joint accounts, through separate channels. I used a trusted attorney, filed for medical disability, opened a protected trust, rerouted insurance payouts, documented every transaction. I did not hide it. I just isolated it. Isolation is protection, and protection requires foresight. I foresaw the collapse. I prepared for it. I knew they would not leave quietly. I knew they would try to control the narrative. I knew they would claim incompetence. The neighbor grew careless. He always does. Abusers mistake silence for surrender. They mistake stillness for defeat. He started staying longer, brought a friend once, laughed in the hallway, left the door unlocked. I recorded the conversation, not with a device, with memory, with timestamps, with the exact phrasing. I cross-referenced it with security camera logs I had quietly installed. Motion activated, cloud-backed, password encrypted. I did not watch them abuse me. I watched them record themselves. Every visit, every excuse, every slip of the tongue. I compiled it, organized it, handed copies to my attorney, to Dr. Eris, to a victim advocacy specialist. I did not ask for revenge. I asked for procedure. Procedure does not require emotion. It requires execution. I executed. Every day, in every session, in every boundary, in every quiet moment where I chose documentation over despair. Despair is a luxury I could not afford. I could not afford to wonder if I would ever walk. I could only afford to know that I would never be helpless again. And helplessness is a state of mind. I left it behind. I replaced it with protocol. Protocol wins. Not in headlines, in courtrooms, in depositions, in the quiet moment when the abuser realizes the victim has been building a case, not a grave. I was building, quietly, consistently, unapologetically. The blueprint was clear. The foundation was set. I was ready for the next phase. Recovery isn't linear. It's architectural. You don't rebuild a spine by hoping. You rebuild it by reinforcing what's left, rerouting what's damaged, and teaching the nervous system to trust itself again. The somatic therapy didn't promise a miracle, promised recalibration. I learned to map the tremors, to distinguish between nerve fatigue and panic response, to breathe without bracing for impact. My therapist, Dr. Vance, didn't coddle me. He drilled me.
Grounding technique.
Sensory reorientation. Cognitive restructuring. He taught me that trauma lives in the gaps between stimulus and response. I filled those gaps with protocol. Every session was a rep. Every rep was a brick. I wasn't just healing. I was hardening. Meanwhile, the legal architecture took shape. My attorney, a former federal prosecutor named Hayes, didn't deal in emotion. He dealt in admissibility. We compiled the evidence, not as a narrative, as a chain. Timestamps, cloud logs, medical reports, financial rerouting, independent cognitive assessments. We built a dossier that couldn't be dismissed as trauma response or paranoia. It was forensic. It was clean. Hayes called it airtight. I called it necessary. We filed a protective order under the radar, sealed the financial trusts, placed a silent monitor on the joint accounts. I didn't freeze them. I let them run. Let them bleed. Let them think they were winning. Greed is predictable. It always overreaches. She started talking about long-term care facilities, about selling the house, about downsizing. She framed it as practicality. I framed it as liquidation. She didn't know I had already transferred the deed to a blind trust. Didn't know I had rerouted the insurance payouts. Didn't know the neighbor's visits were no longer just violations. They were depositions. Every time he stepped into the room, he was adding to his own indictment. I stopped flinching. I started observing. Not with fear, with curiosity. I watched how he avoided eye contact, how he checked the door, how he spoke in hushed tones, as if quietness could erase the act. It doesn't. Silence doesn't erase crime. Preserves it. I preserved it. In logs. In recordings. In the quiet certainty that justice doesn't arrive with sirens. It arrives with paperwork. The neighbor grew bolder. Complacency is the abuser's blind spot. He assumed the chair meant captivity. He didn't understand that captivity is a mindset. I had already left the room. My body was still there. My strategy was already in motion. I started testing boundaries. Small shifts. A changed medication schedule. A different therapist. A locked drawer. He noticed. He adjusted. He tried to reassert control. He brought up my mobility, my prognosis, my dependence. He thought he was reminding me of my place. He was actually documenting his own arrogance. I let him. Arrogance leaves fingerprints. I collected them all. Dr. Vance introduced a new phase. Neuromuscular retraining. Not for walking. For agency. I learned to trigger microcontractions. To engage core stability. To transfer weight without assistance. It wasn't recovery in the traditional sense. It was reclamation. I didn't need to run a marathon. I needed to stand long enough to testify. I needed to hold a pen without shaking. I needed to look a jury in the eye and not break. I practiced it. Daily. In the quiet hours. When the house was still. When the door was locked. When the only sound was my breath and the steady hum of the machine I was rebuilding inside myself. Hayes called on a Tuesday. Said the filing was ready. Said we had enough for criminal charges. Said we could move to civil forfeiture. Said the moment we pulled the trigger, there was no going back. I didn't hesitate. I said pull it. Not with rage. With precision. Precision doesn't require volume. It requires alignment. I was aligned. My body. My mind. My evidence. My strategy. I wasn't waiting for a miracle. I was executing a plan. And plans, when built correctly, don't fail. They unfold. I closed the laptop, locked the notebook, sat in the quiet, felt the weight of what was coming. Not fear. Readiness. The kind that comes when you stop surviving and start operating. I was operating. Fully. Deliberately. Unapologetically. The blueprint was complete. The foundation was set. I was ready for the next phase. The execution didn't start with a raid. It started with a summons. Process servers don't knock politely when the evidence is this heavy. They deliver. And when they did, the house went silent. Not the quiet of peace. The quiet of a trap snapping shut. I was in my chair. She was in the kitchen. He was at the front door, letting himself in like he owned the threshold. I didn't look up. I just pressed record on the dashboard camera I'd quietly mounted in the living room. The server handed her the envelope first. Then him. She opened it. Her face didn't change at first. Then it did. The color drained. The paper shook. He took his. Read it. Swore. Tried to hand it back. The server said it's already filed. He turned to me, asked what I'd done. I didn't answer. I just pointed to the recorder. The red light was steady. Hayes had filed under 3 jurisdictions. Criminal sexual assault. Coercive control. Fraudulent financial diversion. The civil overlay attached to it froze the joint accounts, placed a lien on the house, and triggered an immediate audit of the insurance payouts they'd been siphoning. It wasn't a surprise attack. It was a controlled demolition. I'd spent months laying the charges. Now the detonator was pressed. Panic sets in fast when the illusion of control shatters. She started bargaining, crying, saying she did it out of stress, that he manipulated her, that I wouldn't understand. I listened, didn't interrupt, let her talk herself into the record. He tried intimidation, said I was delusional, that the chair made me paranoid, that no judge would believe a paralyzed man over 2 functional adults. I didn't raise my voice. I opened a folder, slid it across the table. Inside, Time-stamped audio, security logs, medical evaluations, financial rerouting confirmations, independent psychiatric clearance. He stopped talking. She stopped crying. The room felt cold. I didn't feel triumphant. I felt calibrated. Calibration means the system is functioning as designed. I'd spent months training my nervous system to stop flinching. Now it was working. My hands were steady. My voice was even. My breathing was controlled. The body had caught up to the mind. Hayes called an hour later. Said the emergency restraining order was granted. Said the police were en route for initial statements. Said the asset freeze was active. I thanked him. Hung up. Looked at them. Told them to pack what they needed. Told them they had 40 minutes before law enforcement arrived. Told them not to touch the security system. Told them the doors would unlock automatically when the officers got here. They didn't argue. They just moved, like puppets with cut strings. When they left, the house felt different. Not empty, cleared. I rolled to the window, watched the car pull away. Didn't wave. Didn't feel relief. Just acknowledgement. Acknowledgement that the ledger was finally balancing itself. I turned off the recorder, backed up the files to 3 separate drives, handed one to Hayes, one to Dr. Vance, kept one for myself. Not for revenge. For record. Records don't fade. They verify. I closed the laptop, rolled to the kitchen, made coffee, sat in the quiet. The silence wasn't heavy anymore. It was mine. The legal process would take months. Depositions, hearings, medical reviews, civil hearings. I wasn't afraid of the timeline. I built my life around patience. Patience doesn't wait for justice. Prepares for it. I was prepared. Fully. Deliberately. Unapologetically. I started attending court preparation sessions. Not to relive the trauma. To map the testimony. Hayes drilled me on phrasing. On consistency. On how to answer without over-explaining. I practiced it. Daily. In the mirror. In the notebook. In the quiet hours where the only sound was my breath and the steady hum of the machine I was rebuilding inside myself. I learned that truth doesn't require drama. It requires precision. Precision wins. Not in headlines. In courtrooms. In the quiet moment when the abuser realizes the victim has been building a case. Not a grave. I was building. The blueprint was executing. The foundation was holding. I was ready for the next phase. The deposition wasn't a confrontation. It was an excavation. Hayes had prepared me for weeks. Not on what to say, on what not to say. Over-explaining invites manipulation. Silence invites panic. I learned to answer in measured increments. Yes. No. I don't recall. I have documentation. That was the rhythm. The neighbor's attorney tried to frame it as miscommunication. Implied my paralysis compromised my cognition. Suggested I was vulnerable to suggestion. Hayes didn't argue. He just played the audio. Time-stamped. Clear. Unedited. The room went still. The attorney stopped typing. The court reporter's fingers paused. I didn't look at the neighbor. I looked at the transcript. Precision doesn't require eye contact. It requires evidence. The civil hearings ran alongside the criminal docket. Asset tracing, insurance fraud, coercive control, financial diversion. Every claim they made was met with a ledger entry. Every alibi was dismantled by a security log. The judge didn't raise his voice. He just asked for the next exhibit. I provided it. My physical therapy continued through it all. Not as a distraction, as reinforcement. Somatic regulation kept my nervous system from hijacking the stand. I learned to track my pulse, to ground my posture, to separate the memory of the chair from the reality of the courtroom. Dr. Vance attended 3 sessions. Not as a witness, as a stabilizer. He taught me to breathe through the cross-examination, to treat it like a drill. Drills don't break. They calibrate. I was calibrated. My wife's defense unraveled first. She tried to play the overwhelmed caregiver, the stressed wife, the victim of circumstance. Hayes introduced the financial records, the diverted insurance payouts, the joint account withdrawals timed to his visits, the forged signatures on the medical release forms. She stopped crying, started sweating. The neighbor tried intimidation on the stand, tried to project confidence. But confidence built on lies fractures under direct examination. His timeline contradicted the security logs. His statements clashed with the audio. His attorney objected repeatedly. The judge sustained twice, overruled once, and finally warned him to stick to the facts. He couldn't. Facts don't lie. People do. And he was running out of room to hide. The turning point wasn't a dramatic outburst. It was a quiet admission. The court-appointed financial auditor testified, traced the money, followed the routing, identified the diverted funds, concluded the pattern wasn't accidental. It was systematic. The judge nodded, made a note, scheduled the sentencing phase. I didn't feel victory. I felt verification. Verification means the architecture held. I rolled back to my hotel room after the hearing. Not my house. I kept it sealed, preserved. Evidence stays pristine when it's not lived in. I sat on the bed, opened the notebook, added one line, deposition complete. Cross-examination survived. Timeline intact. Closed it. Didn't celebrate. Just breathed. The body still ached. The nerves still misfired. But the mind was clear. And clarity outlasts pain. Hayes called. Said the DA was moving forward on the criminal charges. Said the civil judgment would follow. Said we were in the final stretch. I thanked him. Hung up. Stared at the ceiling. The quiet wasn't heavy anymore. It was steady. I wasn't waiting for justice. I was watching it assemble itself. Piece by piece. Document by document. Protocol by protocol. I was ready for the next phase. The trial didn't arrive with theatrics. It arrived with procedure. Courtroom 4B. Fluorescent lights, wooden benches, the low hum of a ventilation system that never quite worked. I sat in my chair, not as a victim, as a witness to my own reclamation. Hayes didn't open with emotion. He opened with exhibits. Exhibit A, the cloud-backed security logs. Exhibit B, the time-stamped audio recordings. Exhibit C, the financial audit tracing $340,000 in diverted insurance payouts. Exhibit D, the independent cognitive and psychiatric evaluations confirming full mental capacity. The prosecution didn't need a narrative. They had a timeline, and timelines don't bend. They just run. The neighbor's attorney tried to pivot to consent, implied I was confused, suggested the recordings were doctored. The judge didn't entertain it. He called for the digital forensic specialist. She testified on chain of custody, hash verification, and metadata integrity. The defense rested on sand. The wife's testimony fractured under cross-examination. She tried to play the overwhelmed caregiver again. Hayes introduced the forged medical releases, the joint account withdrawals timed to his visits, the text messages where she coordinated his access while I was in physical therapy. She stopped speaking, started trembling. The courtroom didn't gasp. It just waited. Waiting is what happens when the truth finally has the floor. The verdict didn't take days. Took hours. Guilty on all counts. Criminal sexual assault. Coercive control. Fraud. Conspiracy. The civil judgment followed within the week. Full asset forfeiture. Restitution orders.
Permanent restraining order.
The neighbor received 12 to 15 years. The wife received 8 to 10. With mandatory financial restitution and a permanent ban from medical decision-making. The judge didn't moralize. He just read the statute. Justice isn't poetry. It's arithmetic. And the math finally balanced. I didn't stand when they were let out. I didn't need to. My posture was already straight. The chair was just transport. The mind was already walking. The treatment didn't stop at the verdict. It accelerated. Dr. Vance shifted from stabilization to reintegration, neuromuscular stimulation, weight-bearing protocols, gait training with assistive devices. It wasn't about erasing the injury. It was about reclaiming agency. I learned to transfer independently, to stand with parallel bars, to take 3 steps without collapsing. Each step was a rep. Each rep was a boundary. I didn't cry when I stood. I logged it. Date, time. Duration, heart rate, data doesn't lie. It just proves you survived long enough to rebuild. The body remembers trauma, but it also remembers progress. I fed it progress. Consistently, deliberately, without apology. The restitution hit the trust account on a Tuesday. I didn't spend it. I allocated it. 40% to a secured medical reserve, 30% to a long-term care trust, 20% to operational independence, 10% to legal compliance and record archiving. I bought a modified vehicle, hired a part-time aide for household logistics, upgraded the home security system, not for fear, for control. Control isn't isolation. It's sovereignty. And sovereignty requires infrastructure. I built it, documented it, maintained it. The house was no longer a crime scene. It was a sanctuary. Sanctuaries don't require locks. They require standards. I held mine. I stopped referring to it as revenge. Revenge is reactive. What I practiced was reclamation. Reclamation doesn't require the other person to fall. It just requires you to stop kneeling. I stopped kneeling. I started operating. The nervous system had recalibrated. The legal case was closed. The financial architecture was secure. The only variable left was time. And time, when managed correctly, compounds. I didn't know what the next year would bring. I didn't need to. I had the blueprint. I had the protocol. I had the quiet certainty that I was no longer a patient in my own life. I was the architect, and architects don't look back at the rubble. They look at the foundation. The foundation was solid. The work was mine. I was ready for the next phase. The gavel didn't end the story. It just cleared the room. After the sentencing, the noise stopped. No more hearings. No more depositions. No more attorneys trading objections like currency. Just the quiet hum of a case file closing. I didn't celebrate. I calibrated. Calibration means you adjust your output to match the new reality. The new reality was simple. The threat was neutralized. The ledger was balanced. The architecture was mine to occupy. I rolled back to the house, not as a patient, as an occupant. The security system had been upgraded. Motion sensors, biometric access, independent monitoring. I didn't install it out of paranoia. I installed it out of protocol. Protocol doesn't ask if you're safe. It ensures you are. I reviewed the final audit. Restitution transferred. Joint accounts severed. Insurance payouts redirected. The financial architecture was no longer defensive. It was operational. I hired a fiduciary, not to manage my money, to manage my compliance. Compliance is the quiet engine of longevity. Longevity doesn't require speed. It requires structure. I had it. Physical therapy shifted from stabilization to integration. Dr. Vance stopped focusing on survival. He started focusing on sustainability, weight distribution, core engagement, step sequencing. I didn't chase a miracle. I chased metrics, millimeters of muscle activation, seconds of balance, degrees of joint mobility. I logged it all, not for validation, for verification. Verification is the antidote to doubt. I had spent months doubting my own body. Now I was measuring it. The body responded to precision, not hope. Precision doesn't require belief. It requires repetition. I repeated it, daily, deliberately, without apology. I stopped using the word victim. Victimhood is a temporary state. I had transitioned to architect. Architects don't dwell on the collapse. They study the load points. I studied mine. The neural pathways that misfired under stress. The financial structures that leaked under pressure. The boundaries that blurred under manipulation. I reinforced them, not with walls, with standards. Standards don't negotiate. They hold. I held them, every day, in every decision, in every quiet morning where I woke up and knew, without doubt, that I was no longer waiting for permission to exist. The psychological integration was slower than the physical. Trauma doesn't leave in a straight line. It spirals. I learned to recognize the echoes, the sudden tension in the shoulders, the instinct to lock doors twice, the flinch at unexpected footsteps. I didn't suppress them. I mapped them. Mapping turns panic into data. Data turns data into protocol. I built response trees. Not for emergencies, for recalibration. When the nervous system spiked, I didn't fight it. I grounded it. Breath count. Weight shift. Sensory anchor. The drills held. The mind stayed online. Dr. Vance called it neuroplastic sovereignty. I called it operational clarity. Clarity doesn't require forgiveness. It requires function. I was functional. I began dismantling the residual ties. Not the legal ones. The psychological ones. I archived the court transcripts. Filed the medical records. Sealed the financial ledgers. Not to forget. To compartmentalize. Compartmentalization isn't repression. It's logistics. You don't carry evidence into daily life. You store it in secure archives. I did. Then I closed the tabs. Cleared the cache. Reset the baseline. The house felt different. Not empty. Intentional. Every object had a purpose. Every room had a protocol. I didn't decorate. I calibrated. Calibration is what happens when a space finally matches the mind that occupies it. My mind was steady. The space followed. I didn't know what the next year would bring. I didn't need to. I had the blueprint. I had the protocol. I had the quiet certainty that justice isn't a destination. It's a foundation. And foundations don't require applause. They require maintenance. Fully, deliberately, unapologetically. The ledger was closed. The foundation was set. The routine was steady. I was ready for the final phase. Not with the past. With the present. The work was mine. And I was done surviving. I was building. The second year post-verdict didn't arrive with a milestone. It arrived as a rhythm. Wake, therapy, work, documentation, rest, repeat. The cadence no longer required enforcement. It required trust. Trust in the architecture I'd built. Trust that the foundation would hold without constant inspection. I stopped tracking court dockets. Stopped monitoring parole hearings. Stopped measuring my peace against their sentences. Comparison is a leak in the foundation. Patched it. My body didn't miraculously heal. It adapted. Neuroplasticity isn't a reset button. It's a rerouting system. I learned to walk with forearm crutches. Not gracefully, functionally. Each step was a calculated transfer of weight. A deliberate engagement of core stability. A conscious override of nerve static. I didn't chase the man I was before the accident. I built the man the accident required me to become. Dr. Vance called it post-traumatic integration. I called it operational sovereignty. Sovereignty doesn't require perfection. It requires consistency. I was consistent. The house ran on protocol. Not rigidity. Reliability. Biometric access. Automated climate control. Scheduled maintenance windows. I hired a part-time logistics coordinator. Not for care. For compliance. Compliance ensures the system outlasts the operator. I stopped viewing dependency as failure. I reframed it as delegation. Delegation isn't surrender. It's optimization. I optimized everything.
Finance.
Health. Boundaries. Time. I stopped saying yes to convenience. Started saying yes to design. Design solves what discipline cannot. I stopped using the word revenge. Revenge is reactive. What I practiced was reclamation. Reclamation doesn't require the other person to fall. It just requires you to stop kneeling. I stopped kneeling. I started operating. The nervous system had recalibrated. The legal case was closed. The financial architecture was secure. The only variable left was time. And time, when managed correctly, compounds. I began mentoring others navigating coercive control. Not through speeches. Through documentation. I taught them how to log patterns. How to secure evidence. How to separate trauma response from tactical planning. I didn't offer hope. I offered architecture. Architecture outlasts emotion. I received a letter from a state victim advocacy board. Not from them. From a compliance officer. Asking if I'd contribute to a training module on post-abuse financial autonomy and evidence preservation. I agreed. Not for recognition. For replication. Replication is the quiet engine of legacy. Legacy isn't what you leave behind. It's what you build so others can stand on it. I built for them, not with money, with structure, with boundaries, with truth. Truth doesn't shield you from pain, prepares you for it. I prepared myself. I prepared others. I stopped waiting for closure. I started building continuity. Continuity requires maintenance. I maintained it every day, in every choice, in every quiet morning where I woke up and knew, without doubt, that I belonged to myself. That is the only victory that matters. Not revenge, not reunion, sovereignty. I will keep walking, quietly, honestly, unapologetically. The ledger is balanced. The foundation is solid. The work is mine, and I will keep doing it until the end.